from the Deep State Chronicle studios in St. Petersburg, Florida. I am your host, Will Gragel. Again, you are watching the Deep State Chronicle. Today is February 17th, 2020. It is Monday, continuing our work with the aftermath of the Adam and Eve story, Chapter 4, Angels and UFOs, on page 47. Now we come to a disputing subject. If you stick your toe in the water, it either gets burned or frozen. It could create a controversy in a millisecond or even a microsecond. In one aspect, I have a distinct advantage, for I know how nature makes gravity. And once we understand the process, the procedure for us to produce man-made gravity is to duplicate nature's process in controlled fashion. Once we understand this, we can expand our understanding to include propulsion, communications, and weaponry. Ian Thomas knew Nikola Tesla. That's it. I'm confirming it right there. Any nation, large or small, which finds this process will have the world at its mercy. Any nation which discovers how to use it for any one of the three purposes automatically has the other two. Any nation, even the smallest, having all three processes, will control our planet with unchallengeable invincibility. Also, we can understand just about every UFO sighting and experience, how and why small UFOs are built as they are, and why large UFOs are easier to design and construct just from considerations of the power plant. Of course, a 50-mile-long mothership would be more difficult to manufacture if we consider structural requirements. I have seen several of these behemoths, along with many other persons. I have seen the smaller discus-like vehicles also. Note that a common cross-section of all these vehicles, behemoth and small, is to have just one cross-section circular. Now we come to another factor. What is an angel? And further, who is an angel? Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John wrote about angels as if they were a normal, accepted part of life in their times. It all started when Mary Magdalene, or as I prefer to call her, the Mary of the Magdalene, I'll get into that later, Mary, the mother of James and Salome, decided to go to the sepulchre where Jesus was buried. There they found the blocking stone removed and Jesus gone. They found one or two men there. Matthew said he was an angel whose countenance was like lightning, and his raiment was white as snow. And Mark said, and entering into the sepulchre, they saw a young man sitting on the right side, clothed in a long white garment. Not once did Mark mention that there was an angel there. Luke said, and it came to pass, as they, presumably the three women, were much perplexed thereabout. Behold, two men stood by them in shining garments. John said, but Mary stooped down and looked into the sepulchre, and seeth two angels in white sitting, the one at the head and the other at the feet, where the body of Jesus had lain. There is an entertaining game which sometimes is played at parties. Everyone sits in chairs in a circle, and the first on one end is given a short message in writing. Each person relays the message verbally, whispering the message into the next person's ear until the last person in the circle receives it and writes it down. Invariably, the two written messages bear little resemblance to each other. If we go through the circle, each one telling what the message was that he received, we find that the message deteriorated each time it was relayed. Sometimes one step in the relaying circle changes the whole meaning of the message. Try it sometime when you're at a party. It's fun and revealing. The strange thing is that the mathematics of communications theory and exact science predicts this deterioration in relaying intelligent information. The more links in the relay, the more the deterioration. The worst series of links is to have all the links human, like the ring of chairs, one person per chair. The more persons, the more ridiculous the deterioration. Now, none of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John were at the sepulchre, so what they wrote was not firsthand information. Even if each of one of them had spoken to the same woman of the three who went to the sepulchre, her story could or would have differed each time she told it to one of the four. Or, if each of the women told the story to a different disciple, the story most certainly would have varied. Further, if none of them told the disciples the story, but the disciples told the story by a mix of secondary sources, it would have varied greatly. The fact is that we don't know how Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John got the sepulchre story. That cannot be changed. In spite of all the differences between the four relatings of the same story, we have to take into account each version, if nothing more than just to see where we stand. Matthew stated, one angel, countenance like lightning, raiment white as snow. The angel spoke to the women. All had fear of the angel. Mark stated, one young man seated on the right side, clothed in a long white garment. The three women were affrighted as he spoke to the women. Luke stated, two men in shining garments were standing by the women. The women were afraid. Both spoke to the women and saying the same words. John stated, Mary Magdalene alone stood outside the sepulchre, stooping and looking in. She saw two angels in white. Angels were sitting, one at the head and one at the feet, where Jesus had lain. They conversed with her. No fear was mentioned. She saw Jesus and did not recognize him. She thought he was the gardener. John's relation varies so much from the other three that it suggests a different event. It appears that she visited the sepulchre with the other women, then ran back, encountered Peter, and told him that the stone was taken away from the sepulchre. The two of them ran back to the sepulchre to start this story. So what can we conclude from these four stories? Let's see. The angels looked like men. In fact, they must have been men. And two, whether there were one or two of them, he or they were long, bright, white, clean, glistening robes. And three, although strangers, they could speak Hebrew and spoke calmly and authoritatively to the women. And four, whether one or two of them, they had countenances which caused fear in the women, except in the story related by John. It could be that Mary Magdalene, in her first visit to the sepulchre with the other two women, had visited with the man or men at that time, and who had dispelled the women's fears with his or their words. So when she returned, she had no fear. And what about these men? They were not known anywhere. They were dressed totally differently than anyone in the area, or even far away from that area. They showed absolutely no fear of anyone or anything. And Matthew stated that the angel of the Lord descended from heaven and rolled back the stone from the door of the sepulchre. I'll bet a pound of earth that he was waiting at the sepulchre for those who crucified Jesus to show up. Hence, his countenance was like lightning. It looks as if we must conclude that these men, these angels, came to earth in their space vehicle to take care of the aftermath of Jesus' crucifixion. Let's say that their space vehicle was like an Ezekiel's wheel. Any dissenter's only alternative to this named calling. So why would these men, these angels, watch over Jesus? The only answer is in legend. In what they watched over him, in that they watched over him because he was a genius, a man who graduated from the Nakal Temple in so short a time that he could spend his life taking his learnings of the true faith from the temple, turn them into teachings, and take them to the rest of the world. These people from other worlds never come here to live because this planet is the garbage dump of the universe. We murder, rape, steal, wage war, killing millions. There are millions of young girls and women of the Eastern Hemisphere sexually mutilated to prevent them from having sexual intercourse before marriage. There is forced prostitution by kidnapping child females being sold into marriage, then sold into prostitution. Out and out slavery. Greed beyond comparison. Wanton destruction of our planet by pollution and greed. Unbridled reproduction without responsibility. The spread of death dealing disease by irresponsible action. And all of these deeds being perpetrated as commonly as you and I sprinkle salt on our food. On top of this, we have a worldwide addiction to narcotics and narcotic selling. We have wife beating, girlfriend beating, child beating, and murder on an unprecedented scale in our country. So prevalent in other countries that it is a matter of normalcy. Rape is so common the world over that if we were to stop it, knowing where and how to stop it would be as difficult as knowing where and how to stop narcotics abuse and selling, which has the world firmly by the tail now. Governments have deteriorated to a point where a whole planet is near anarchy. Some governments are on the brink of wipeout from losses to AIDS. Let's just take a look at our own government, the federal government of the USA. Do you know that every government official who approves of the federal budget violates his oath to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States of America? Consequently, each one who approves a federal budget every year is subject to impeachment. Why is each one approving a federal budget not impeached? Because there are too many of them? Probably. Why should each one approving a budget be impeached? Well, let's see. Our government is in business. In fact, over 4,000 businesses. Each and every one of them loses money every year. They make up for their losses every year by asking the legislature to appropriate funds to cover their losses. We're talking about the bankers here. Chan Thomas knew about this before the crash of 2008 when the rest of us finally figured this out. Interesting. I didn't know anything about any of this. Now, how our government ever got into over 4,000 businesses to begin with is a question for historians to answer. I won't attempt to analyze it here. The point is, we are in these businesses. How legal is it for our government to be in any business, and what can be done about it? It has always been an axiom of constitutional law that if it's not in the Constitution, the government cannot do it. Perhaps you may remember the occasion during the last month of President Reagan's administration. He was invited to an assembly of seniors of 3 high schools in Florida to address them. In the question and answer period afterward, the valedictorian of each class was allowed to ask a question. When the last one, a young girl, rose for her question, the president was being rushed off the stage by his aides. He told her to go ahead with her question while he was walking to the side and rear of the stage. She asked, "What can Congress do?" The president, reaching the right rear corner of the stage with his arm upraised, shouted back, "If it's not in the Constitution, they can't do it." And then he was gone. In law, he was right. In practice, he was dead wrong. Congress and the president have been violating that point of law for years. If anyone in any branch of the U.S. government grants approval of funds for any business in which the government is engaged, he or she is approving the government's participation in an unconstitutional activity, which is not authorized by the Constitution of the United States of America, and is therefore breaking his or her oath of office to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States. The same goes for any executive, president included, who signs the appropriation of funds and or dispenses them. Do you know how much the annual tax on the Treasury by those government business losses cost us? The total of all personal income taxes, estate taxes, and gift taxes. And those businesses, all of them, pay no taxes and pay no rent. Further, in the history of estate taxes and gift taxes, our government has never netted a dime. They spend all they collect collecting it. Congress has to borrow for that part of the business losses to make up for the non-netting estate and gift taxes. IRS has an estate tax audit rate of 105% to 110% annually. Why can't they trust themselves? Our government lies to its citizenry as policy. Consider how much they have lied to the U.S. about MIAs in Vietnam, about veterans missing in action in Vietnam. Right, okay. When and there's still a ton over there. Who God knows if any of them are still alive. And, oh man, that's hard to think about, just being reminded of it. Yeah, ladies and gentlemen, there's a ton of our prisoners of war that are still in Vietnam that have never been rescued. It is year 2020. I just want you to think about that. When Congress and the president passed the excise tax law during World War II, they promised that the law was merely to raise wartime funds and that the tax would be repealed right after the war. They lied. Take the case of the Native Americans in the southeastern U.S. who had their land confiscated by the federal government during World War II. These Americans were promised that the land was taken for wartime use only and would be returned as soon as the war was over. To this day, the land has never been returned to its rightful owners. The government has lied, as usual. Take the case of Bill Benson. He checked, in person, the archives of every state in the nation, plus the National Archives, and discovered that the 16th Amendment never passed. It's the law that never existed. It's an illegal amendment to our Constitution. As a result, Benson did not pay taxes. He was arrested, brought to court, and his attorneys were made to submit more than 80 briefs, one after the other, in an obvious attempt to draw out the case. The judge made Benson perform his archival researches again, this time using procedures ordered by the court. Benson did so again, adhering to those procedures precisely. The results came out the same. So he proved under court-ordered procedures that the tax law, the 16th Amendment to the Constitution, never passed and is literally illegally being enforced. Our government lied again. Nevertheless, the court found him guilty and sentenced Benson to prison. He was on a medicinal schedule with a life-preserving medicine. The prison changed that and reduced him to practically a vegetable. Our federal government is now starting to pass into existence laws equivalent to the Roman Catholic state laws of the 7 centuries of the Inquisition concerning property confiscation, both real and personal, also arrest, accusation, trial, and conviction. Looks like Chan Thomas knew about the police state before Alex Jones did, huh? That's really, really interesting. I mean, we've heard about Chan Thomas and his theories on cataclysm, but I have not seen any of this covered anywhere else. Truly. You're getting this exclusively here at the Deep State Chronicle. Just know that right now. Our legislative and executive branches have passed a law that makes the arrest of property legal. Innocent eminent domain laws. Duh. Innocent persons are being arrested without a warrant. Their property arrested also without a warrant, without evidence of proof or guilt. Their bank accounts, homes, cars, personal property, all arrested and seized. How does a house or bank account or a car or a doll or bicycle or tricycle defend itself? How on earth does the victim defend himself when all of his estate has been confiscated? If he proves himself innocent, unbelievably, he is allowed to buy back his property. With what? No bank account, property, cash, credit, or business. Will someone please convince me that our government has not deteriorated? Even if they repeal or modify this law, they passed it to start with. Now what next? more thermonuclear bombshell right here. The sovereignty of our nation is vanishing. A citizen of another country can walk the streets of our country and arrest anyone he hears saying anything that he doesn't like. President Lincoln predicted that our nation would die from action within and not from external attack. And I'm totally in agreement with that. We are definitely going the way of Rome. How right he was. Now we are being made to pay for the criminality our government allowed for years by S&L and bank officers, executives and owners, amounting to billions upon billions of dollars. All they can think to do is to raise taxes when they could accomplish more by cleaning up our government's house, by making our government constitutional, By adopting into action the recommendations of the Grace Commission and the Hoover Commission, and by passing the Liberty Amendment, it's impossible to expect the legislators and executives to change their course to that extent. They are too far down the trail, leaning on the destructive habits they are used to. The Constitution specifically states that Congress has the power and authority to coin money and regulate the value thereof. Nowhere in the Constitution is the right to delegate that authority and responsibility granted under any circumstances whatsoever. Congress unconstitutionally delegated that authority and responsibility to a private bank. We're talking about the Federal Reserve now. And it is costing our nation its economic lifeblood and interest. There's terrible conflict of interest here. That bank wants the national debt to increase. It earns them more interest. Deterioration of our government is achieved by the people in it, approaching a cataclysm, bringing down their nation, just like the mice in the extremely low density magnetic field environment experiment. Very, very true. In the mice experiment, we see universal, forcible rape around the clock and cannibalism as the ultimate signs of criminality during a low-density magnetic field environment. In humans, we can see different refinements of that degree of criminality. Remember, those without empathy turn criminal first. Greed is the most common denominator contributing to criminal behavior. Rape and beating and murder follow closely. Behind all of the billions of the financial institutions, debacle is the greed of those causing the disaster. Common to all criminal disaster is the criminal's mental state that they will get away with their crimes that no one will ever know. That is common to just about every criminal's mind. When those in power in the financial world are touched with this thought, combined with their lack of empathy, they have entered into the world of crime. They might as well stand alongside the rapists, beaters, thieves and robbers, murderers, and be counted. They're all non-empathetic, leveling criminally with the lowering magnetic field density of our planet as it approaches the next cataclysm. This is not an apology for their criminality. It's a damnation of welcoming oneself into an adulthood of no empathy, and the consequences are explicit. We are all responsible for our own acts and our own empathy. This page is for the icing on the cake. The Constitution of the United States of America states bluntly, Article 4, Section 4, the United States shall guarantee to every state in this union a republican form of government, and shall protect each of them against invasions, and on application of the legislature or of the executive, where the legislature cannot be convened, against domestic violence. The only process through which this guarantee made in the supreme law of our nation can be kept is through the United States government. The president and the legislature note that the italicized provision does not specify armed invasion. It includes any and all kinds of invasions. The states of our nation have been invaded by some 6 million illegal immigrants, plus the 3 million more this year. Total taxpayer costs, $35 billion. Looks like Dr. Thomas was for the wall too. Why has our government not honored its responsibility constitutionally assigned to it? Why are U.S. citizens losing their country to illegal aliens? Abraham Lincoln said it in 1838. If the United States of America destruction be our lot, we must be ourselves its author and finisher. As a nation of free men, we must live through all time or die by suicide. That'll be something I cover in another segment. I'm going to be reviewing Sir Francis Glub's The Fate of Empires and the discussion on specifically the final stages of an empire when they basically commit cultural suicide. It happened to Rome, and we're doing it right now in this present time, in real time. It's happening right in front of you and me, both. Anyway, that's the end of this chapter. We'll begin the next chapter, Jesus and Cataclysms. This segment is completed. Again, my name is Will Grey Eagle. You are watching the Deep State Chronicle. It is February the 17th, 2020. It is Monday. If you found this video and you received it well today, Please share it with your friends and other like-minded individuals. And also, if you happen to be new to this channel, please subscribe. For now, that is all.